880,000 words, 154 sonnets, 64 violent deaths, 37 plays, 15 comedies, 12 tragedies, 10 histories, 8 4 or 2 weeks practical training. Just a few miles from where Shakespeare lived and worked in London, at the #1 drama school in the UK for student satisfaction, LAMDA, the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art.
Join their Shakespeare Summer School, and you'll train at the oldest drama school in the UK, with a faculty who have helped LAMDA grads win 4 Oscars, 16 Golden Globes, 20 BAFTAs, 12 Tonys, and 36 Olivier Awards. Their 8-week course will also earn you college credit. Apply now at lambda.ac.uk.
Loki is this ancient, mythic character who, in our collective mythology, seems to represent the trickster, the boundary crosser, the shapeshifter, somebody who's mercurial and spontaneous and unpredictable, and someone who we need and is necessary. And I think maybe Loki escaping death a couple of times is an emblem of who Loki is in our culture.
Welcome to In the Envelope, the Actors Podcast, where the biggest names in film, television, and theater help craft a complete guide to the creative life. I am your host, Backstage Senior Editor, Vinnie Mancuso, and I am so excited to say that we'll be joined today by the great Tom Hiddleston. Now, Tom is obviously an incredibly accomplished actor across Tony and Olivier-nominated stage performances, screen roles like Crimson Peak, Only Lovers Left Alive, and the Hank Williams biopic, I Saw the Light. But the role that's defined his career so far is the god of mischief, Loki, who Tom has played in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for the past 13 years. Of course, making his debut in Kenneth Branagh's Thor in 2011, alongside Chris Hemsworth in the title role, back when a lot less people knew their names. Since then, he's been a constant presence in the franchise, a villain, the big bad of an Avengers film, an anti-hero, just a hero. He's been good, he's been bad, he's been alive, he's been dead, he's actually died a few times now, only to return, particularly for his Disney Plus spin-off series, Loki, which just wrapped its 2nd season back in November of last year. We dive pretty deep into everything Loki here, from the days before Tom's first audition, to the evolution of his MCU arc, to, of course, what the future holds for him after Loki Season 2's enigmatic ending. It's a fascinating, very wide-ranging chat with an actor who respects and loves the work. Let's get right into it. Here is Tom Hiddleston. Tom, how's it going? I feel like we caught you at a bit of a busy time.
No, it's going very well, and I'm here for this.
Amazing.
And for you. And I'm very grateful that you are having me in the magazine and have made the time to talk to me. It's a real pleasure. Thanks for making the time.
Of course. It's so nice to meet you. I hope everything went well yesterday. There's a photo shoot yesterday. I hope that one all went well.
It was great. The photographer, Eric, was an absolute gentleman. The location was extremely serene, actually. So, yeah, it was a nice oasis of calm in a busy period.
Oh, we can all use a nice oasis of calm. I love that. So I have so much to ask you. There's so much to discuss with Loki, all that. I am curious to start off with, you wrapped Loki Season 2 like 2022, October, something around there.
Yeah.
So I'm always curious whenever I talk to somebody about a project like that, what it's like to return to it, you know, whether you find something new to it because of the time in between, what is it like to sort of move on with your life and then come back to have conversation after conversation about something that you kind of finished 2 years ago?
That's such an interesting question. I think perhaps for me, there is always a a very satisfying sense of completion when you cross the finish line and you get to the last day of a film shoot and it's all in the can and you say to yourself, that'll do, pig. and that you've run every step of every mile in the great marathon that you set up for yourself. However, I would say that there is this unwritten chapter always, which is it's not over until it's connected with the audience. And I feel very fortunate that I've been an executive producer on both seasons of Loki. And so actually the creative journey wasn't over for me because I was in post-production, invited to be involved in the edit and assembling the story together from the many, many hours of footage that we had gathered. So I had a long journey in post, working very closely with Kevin Wright, who produced the show for Marvel Studios, and watching cuts and giving notes, and even remembering, actually, if you go 2 takes, I think that's take 3 in that scene, but I think take 5 is slightly more emotional. So we could use take 5, but maybe take 3 is better here, and we can use the take 5 version. And so just remembering, you're playing with the dials of the detail of emotional tone in the story, and then you finish it, and there's another sense of a closing of a chapter, and then it's out in the world, and that's always this extraordinary moment of connecting with the audience for whom it's designed. We make it for the audience, and you hand it over to the audience and say, it belongs to you now. And you have another relationship with the work when you listen to the echoes and the resonances that the audience discover in the work. And that's always very satisfying. And perhaps then that's when it feels like the work is done, at least on that particular project. So that was a long answer.
No, we love a long answer. A long answer.
But yes, it's interesting with work, isn't it? Because as an audience member myself, I feel like I invest in films, performances, pieces of great cinema, great acting, and I revisit them, and they accrue meaning for me that is completely separate from the actor who gave that performance or the director who made that film, and separate from the circumstances in which they made it. And I suppose that's the magic of art, is that it gets made and then there's a transmission of meaning to the audience, and then it belongs to them.
As part of what makes this conversation so interesting, because we are discussing a character you've lived with for, I think, 13 years and have returned to, and there have been endings, beginnings, and all that. Yeah. I'd love to try and get a whole sense of that. And I think, a way into that is sort of go back. And I'm curious what you remember about, not your Thor audition, but, the day, 24 hours, 12 hours before your Thor audition, and like what you thought this was going to be, and compared to what it became.
That's such an interesting question. Well, the strangest thing is actually the last, and I mean, I'm just having to remember it myself, is you're quite correct that for the audience, it's been 13 years, but for me, it's actually been 15 years. Yeah. Because I was cast in 2009 when I was 28, and I'm 43 now, but I'm aware that I was cast when I was 28, actually made Thor when I was 29, and the movie came out when I was 30. So for the audience, it's been less time. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to get into the weeds on the math of how old I was. To your point, the 24 hours before my Thor audition, it's so interesting you asked that question. I was just talking about this the other day with Kevin Feige, because we were discussing the new documentary about Christopher Reeve. Mm-hmm. And which I haven't seen yet, but I hear is extremely affecting. And his first job was working for Richard Donner. And I think, those Superman films had a big impact on Kevin Feige as a young man. And in the 24 hours before my first audition for Thor, I watched Superman. And the reason I watched Superman before that audition was because I had been presented with 3 scenes to play in the audition. And they were not specific to Thor, Loki, or the world of Asgard at all. They were very sincere, very intense, quite high stakes scenes between 2 characters in a conceptual, abstract world. But the scenes were very human and they were about conflict. I remember specifically there was one scene between 2 brothers, but it could have been any 2 brothers in any time, anywhere. But the language was heightened. And I realized looking back, the language was heightened because we were aiming at a world of gods and magic and myth. That these were not naturalistic everyday characters. These were brothers whose conflict had high stakes. And I remember thinking, this is almost Shakespearean, this language, or at least it's elevated in some way. What's the best example I can think of an actor who managed to humanize and make real this elevated world of myth? It's Christopher Reeve and it's Superman. And I'm so glad I watched it because he's just masterful. Mm-hmm. He's masterful in that film, specifically in the first one and in all of them, I think. But, it's in a way, it's a similar premise, which is that he's a god or he's a being from a different realm and a different place in the universe. And it's not naturalistic in the way that we might expect. And he does it, and it's so truthful and it's so clear and clean and open and honest. And I thought, if I can even approximate or get close to the kind of clarity that Christopher Reeve had in those films, I'll be lucky. But it was a really good way of tuning up, I suppose, for the audition. So that was the 24 hours beforehand. And then on the morning of the audition, I think I went for a run, which is my habit before doing anything unusual.
I was going to ask, actually, I wasn't sure at what point this would fit into the conversation, but, in preparing for this, I went down several rabbit holes. I ended up on your RADA student profile.
Wow.
And one of your special interests listed on your profile is walking, which I found really interesting as a thing to put on your resume, basically, or your special interest in walking. So I'm curious. You mentioned that part of your process or part of your thing is going for a run, getting moving. So as we talk about your process, where does that fit in? How does that fit into your creative process, the getting moving, walking around, sort of just getting out into the world?
Life is movement. I really believe that. And it's something that I've understood the more I've worked, I think, is that valuable, imaginative, interesting, profound, complex, deep, creative work doesn't always have to be work you do at a desk. And by the way, I've done some really interesting work at a desk. So I'm not dissing sitting down with a pen and paper and an open mind and a spare hour. I think that can be enormously valuable. But sometimes it's good to take all of the collected material and take it outside, I have found, and breathe and experience the world and get out into nature. And I find ideas come to me from a different place and in a different shape. And they're often not intellectual in the way that music isn't intellectual. I find when I'm running or walking, the repetitive nature of it relaxes the mind and allows ideas and inspiration to come from a deeper place. And so actually I see my work as an actor as, especially in preparation for a project or in preparation for a scene, is almost preparing myself to be open and ready to receive ideas, to receive energy from other actors, to receive energy from my imagination. It's something I value enormously, and I wonder what the sort of the biology or the physiognomy of it is. It must be about more oxygen in the brain, more oxygen in the bloodstream. You sort of refresh your thinking a bit. It can dislodge you when you're feeling stuck. But it's become something I really rely on, actually, as a way of connecting to something deeper in myself and hoping that depth might resonate in the work for the audience.
That's fascinating. And I kind of want to, use as a jumping point to get into a bit more specifics. Before we talk about Loki season 2, there is a moment from season 1 that really affected me. And I always thought if I got a chance to talk to you, I'd ask about this specific scene. I think it's from the very first episode. And it is a scene of Loki being shown like the totality of his life in like basically a montage that ends with, I think, the words like end of file. It's very just, that was your life.
On the screen in the chamber with at the end when Mobius has left and he's watching essentially a highlight reel of his life.
Yeah. Here's what everything amounted to, and I've always I've written on it before, I've discussed it before. Is your performance in that moment is just pure reaction, pure face work. It's just a crumbling, it's a dismantling. So using that as a specific example, how do you prepare for that, and how do you sort of pull something like that off, where it is such a profound moment that plays just on you, and it's your performance must say, like I said, something existential without words.
I am so touched by your response.
Of course.
Because it was a big day for me and a very profound moment. And I remember it very well. And I suppose there are a couple of strands to my answer. The first is I was able to be very specific with Michael Waldron. He wrote the first season, but he wrote that brilliant first episode and conceived of it. And we together, I was able to be specific about exactly which scenes from Loki's life on the sacred timeline that this Loki should be watching. And I remember really being very precise about the scenes. There were certain scenes from Loki's original story in Thor, from Avengers, from the Dark World, his relationship with his mother and his guilt that he was indirectly responsible for her death, the reconciliation and capitulation with his brother in Ragnarok, the inclusion of hearing his father say, "I love you, my sons," on the cliff top before his own passing. And finally, Loki's own death at the hands of Thanos. And that to stand and watch those events take place was so surreal, because I knew as an actor intellectually that the audience had their own emotional connection to that arc. And also as a performer, I had my own emotional connection to that arc because I was watching chapters from my own life. And then I thought conceptually, what an extraordinary thing for any character to be placed in a liminal chamber outside time and watch a reel of the most significant moments in their life in a compressed form and see it objectively, but also that it's a catalogue of mistakes and missteps, of relationship failure and failures of courage or failures of spirit. And then the imaginative work was, how would Loki feel to watch these events? What would it be like? And it was crucial that Mobius wasn't in the room, because then I believed that Loki would feel in himself, free to feel his internal world honestly, and for that to express itself, as I think we often do when we're alone. And in real terms, there was no screen, and I wasn't looking at anything. I was just looking at a grey wall.
I guess that's the job.
Yeah. But I tried to put myself. I remember it was really interesting. It was a Friday afternoon. It was the last thing we were due to capture before the weekend. Very early on in the shooting schedule, about 2 weeks into it, and I decided, as you perhaps have expected, I spoke to our extraordinary and careful and generous first assistant director, who's called Richard Graves, who was the first AD on both seasons of Loki and as a great man and a primary collaborator in this work. I said to Richard, I'm just going to step off stage for a moment. Could you, and this is convention on sets, as you know, could you give me a 20-minute warning, a 10-minute warning, and a 5-minute warning when you're ready on camera? Unusually, I just want to separate myself from the necessarily practical energy of the set to this readying itself for these shots. And they set up 2 cameras, and he was like, of course I will. And there was a set PA who popped his head out of the door and gave me those warnings. And I decided to run or jog around the stage and internalize as many of those memories of those people, those characters, those actors, and try and find the center of my own vulnerability, because I knew that actually the requirement of my job on that particular day was to lend Loki my capacity to be vulnerable. And it felt challenging and inspiring and exciting. And part of the joy of it in looking back was just going back to basics, trying to simplify this very complex thing. Loki's a demigod. He's this incredibly, as a silhouette to step into. He's on a different scale, totally different scale to my very small, ordinary life. But it was just going back to basics. Go for a jog, get into your body, allow yourself to be open and lend the character your vulnerability, and just be there, just feel it. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. And from what it sounds like, and this is not a surprise, by this point, you know this character inside out. You know the moments that define him. You know all that stuff. And there's been all this years with the character. I know that with Marvel, the future is always a mystery, and we don't know whether season 2 is an ending, a beginning, any of that. But I'm curious, over this time, how many times have you thought you had just played the last moments with this character? You know, like how many times have you had to go through, oh, this is my goodbye. This is the last time I'm playing.
I think officially, let me think about this. I think officially there were 2 big ones.
Okay.
One was at the end of Thor: The Dark World, when in that film, Loki and Thor are on another realm called Svartalfheim, which is the home of the Dark Elves, and Algrim, or Curse, is winning a battle with Thor, and Loki, Algrim, I think his second name is Curse actually, is a sort of great high status dark elf who's become a kind of a great fighter. I mean, Thor is losing and Loki tries to help, and in so doing he sacrifices himself. And as written in the first script, it was a true sacrifice. It was that he gave his life for his brother. And my belief is, or what I've been told, is that in successively about months later, when Marvel were testing the movie in front of test audiences, they're given questionnaires and said, is there anything you didn't understand? And literally every single audience member said, well, obviously Loki's not really dead. and they had to go, they were like, oh, so we've created an expectation in the mind of the audience that that can't possibly be the end of Loki. Maybe we've missed a trick. And so I think it's become not common knowledge now that we went back and reshot the ending of actually Loki. It was Loki pretending to be Odin on the throne of Asgard, and he's somehow pulled this extraordinary magic trick and hoodwinked Thor, and Thor walks away to go and find Jane Foster, and the movie closes with Loki sitting on the throne. So that was I had to reorder my expectations after that. The second time was after Avengers Infinity War. I'd known about that, the opening scene of that film where Loki comes face to face with Thanos for 2 years. I knew about that scene before we started filming Ragnarok. And I knew that the Russos had very eloquently explained to me, Joe and Anthony Russo had explained, we will introduce Thanos as a primary villain. And the reason the audience will believe in his capacity for evil is because of what he does to you in this scene. And I completely understood the architecture of that from a dramaturgical perspective. But the scene itself was enormous. And I remember arriving in Atlanta where we were filming, and I checked into my hotel and I bumped into Josh Brolin within the hour. And he came up to me and wrapped his arms around me, gave me this huge hug and said, "I'm so sorry, man." And, but to be on the dance floor with him on that day, he's so precise, so playful, such a brilliant, tennis partner across the net, as was Chris Hemsworth, of course, who was there as well. And it felt like this really terrific scene with so many different notes to play. And at the end of that scene, I got a big round of applause, and everybody was so sweet and kind and gracious. And I got notes and emails saying, "Tom, you've done so much for us, and what a journey. Come and see us anytime." I really thought that was the end. And then a year later, they had an idea for Avengers Endgame, and I was like, where Loki, the Avengers go back in time, and Loki from 2012 picks up the Tesseract and disappears. I was like, well, where does he go? And then we were beginning again. So the two times I thought it was over, and it wasn't really. But thinking about that scene, I realized there's something I didn't mention about that scene that you picked out in the first episode of season 1 of Loki. Was Loki watching his own death was one of the most thrilling challenges I've ever had as an actor, because I kept imagining, if it were any of us, if you were afforded I don't want to say privilege, but if you were afforded the opportunity or forced to watch your own death as a bystander, it would bring about an existential shock and crisis unlike any other. And it was a scene where I thought, I don't have a reference for how to play this. I just have to allow shock, disgust, disgrace, shame, disbelief, acceptance, incredulity, and sorrow to exist in the center of me. And it was such a fantastically challenging and rewarding scene to play.
It's just the idea of how many times you've had to literally play this like last time. Literally, it's like, and then you come back. And it's just so interesting to talk about a character that you've been able to mold and shape over this much time, and you've said goodbye.
But you know what? As you say, like Loki is, the thing is that I've realized that in human consciousness, that's who Loki is. Mm-hmm. Loki is this ancient, mythic character who in our collective mythology seems to represent the trickster, the transgressor, the boundary crosser, the shapeshifter, somebody who's mercurial and spontaneous and unpredictable, someone who will always confound your expectations and wriggle out from underneath your certainties and your convictions, and someone who we need and is necessary. And I think maybe Loki escaping death a couple of times is sort of an emblem of who Loki is in our culture. Like, of course Loki cheats death.
Well, it's like everybody filling out those forms. They're like, well, that's not right.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
Not how it is, right?
Exactly.
It's always interesting to see who a character becomes over this long of a time. And I'm curious, my specific way into this question is that there is a physical thing about the character that people recognize, and that is how often you flip your hair as Loki. There is, if you Google Loki hair flip, I found an incredible headline which was like, they counted. He's like, Loki flips his hair 32 times. I'm curious with something that specific, at what point something you did naturally becomes part of the character, and then that idea of maybe you did something once and now it's who the character is, and over 13 years it's something people expect. What is that like as an actor, where you're working in quirks that then have to be maintained over 6 movies, 12 episodes of a TV show, stuff like that?
It's so funny. By the way, it's hilarious that you bring that up.
So going to way in, what does he do? Oh, it's the hair flip.
Yeah, I've never been conscious of it. I think I've only ever had very long hair when I've played Loki. And I obviously instinctively don't enjoy having hair in my face. And so I must have done it once just to get it out of my, I flip my head back to get the hair out of my face so I could see what I was doing. And I think it's an instinctive thing that I do that then I became aware that Loki does, because I think Loki's hair is very distinctive. I'm always very conscious of it when I begin to approach playing the character again, is that, genetically, that is not my inheritance. My hair is blonde and curly, and his is the opposite of that. It's much longer and dark. I used to say it's like raven's feathers. It has the shiny black quality of raven's feathers. But yeah, it became a thing. And so I'm honestly still not conscious of doing it, but I hope it's something that's not too distracting.
I think people are okay. I think people have come to understand. It is.
But what's interesting though, and to make a slightly serious point about the breadth of playing this character for so long, is it never feels like the same job. It always feels new, and necessarily so, I believe. I think the audience deserve not yesterday's meal reheated in the microwave. They deserve a new recipe, as it were, and with some of the same ingredients, but it's a different day. And that's been the most enjoyable thing, is that I feel like across 15 years of thinking about Loki and exploring him in my imagination and performing and playing him, he has grown and changed in the way, because that's what people do. People don't stay the same. They grow and they change, and they grow when confronted with challenge. And the challenges that he's confronted are very different, and actually they're increasingly more existentially confusing. And so where Loki's ended up is he's in a radically different place to the place he began. And yet there are thematic connections which I find very satisfying, and I hope the audience find moving, which is that he began life, at least in my imagination and that first iteration in the first Thor, as a deep soul with a broken heart who felt he didn't belong. He didn't belong in his family of origin. He didn't belong as Thor's brother and Odin's son. He didn't have a place in Asgard. He was an orphan, an outcast on the margins. And his whole journey has been about trying to find purpose and belonging. And of course, in the early phases of the MCU, this quest for purpose and belonging is completely misshapen and distorted. And he makes bad choices and he becomes, the villain, because he's motivated by grievance and anger and resentment and entitlement. But comes down to earth in the first Avengers film and says, I am Loki of Asgard and I am burdened with glorious purpose. And then you cut to the end of season 2 of Loki, and he has found a place to belong. And that place is a community of new friends, Mobius and Sylvie and B-15 and OB and Kasey. And the TVA, which has been fragmented as an institution, but which could find a new purpose and do something good. And this, to go back to what I was saying, the deep soul with a broken heart has finally found a purpose and finally found a place to belong.
Using something from season 2 again as the specific here, it's kind of not the opposite, but it's different from that season 1 moment I mentioned where it's all on you. There's the big cathartic moment of season 2 where he really does sort of come into his own. It does feel like, I don't want to say the end or anything, but the end of something. It is a big emotional moment, but it is like a lot of Marvel shows. It's surrounded by a lot of digital effects, and it's probably filmed on what amounts to, like you said, a gray wall.
Unusually for the show, I would say that, just to
absolutely.
You know, for Loki, for the 2 seasons of Loki, the great joy of working on this project across the last 5 years has been to inhabit and live inside the sets of Kasra Farahani, our production designer, who's created the TVA as if it were a real place. And so actually, in terms of the Loki series, that finale of season 2 was unusual because most of the time in production, we were always in these beautifully crafted sets, except for that final moment where it was me and a blue screen.
I just want to ask about you mentioned before, the imagination work during a moment like that, you know, where it is, you watch it, it's an emotional moment, and it's because of the performance. How do you prepare for something like that, where there's less of, like you said, these incredible sets? It's less about the immersion. It's more about really internally, the imagination has to spread to the room so the final product makes sense.
Do you know, it's actually where I come alive, because I find it makes me feel like an actor. And if acting is being truthful in imaginary circumstances, I have to find truthfulness in entirely imaginary circumstances. And so the interior work is, you have to get the engine warmed up, so to speak. And I draw inspiration from everywhere and everyone. And on that occasion, so Loki has made the decision that the only way he can halt the decay of people's lives on various timelines, the only way he can contribute to letting other lives be lived, is to break this, almost like this generator, what we call the temporal loom, which holds time together. And he has to break it and create something else, almost become a different version of it, and hold the timelines together. And it's an act of self-sacrifice and an act of catharsis and redemption. And so in real terms, one day on set, I turned around and I looked at Owen Wilson and Sophia Di Martino and Ke Huy Quan and Wumi Masaku and others, a last look of goodbye. And on another day, I walked out onto the set and walked up the stairs to the big chair, the throne at the end of time. And I knew we were aiming at something mythic, that Loki was finally taking his place as the god of stories, that he was stepping into what it truly means to be a god, or at least as interpreted by the wise words of Mobius, sometimes purpose is more burden than glory. You choose your burden. And this is the burden that Loki's chosen. And so on that day, to set the scene for you, I'm in costume, the green cape and the outfit and the horns, and I've got a cyclorama, a blue screen, and some blue steps and a blue chair, and an amazing crew. And there's a lot of complex camera work. The camera was on a techno crane that was moving around above, below, and behind me to create this epic spectacle. But it was completely exposed. So around the stairs, I could see the crew, and they all had to be there. Special effects people, camera crew, focus pullers, the dolly grip, the producers, the writers, the costume guys, health and safety in case, I fell off fell off the stairs. Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson gave me a beautiful suggestion. They said, we've got some time to set this shot up, so we're going to do it. We're just going to practice the camera move. We've probably got about 45 minutes before we roll. So how can we help you prepare for this? And I said, I don't know. I might step away and I might go for a jog and, listen to some music. I think music is the most immediately evocative and emotional art form. There's a great line from a Renaissance essayist called Walter Pater that said, all art aspires to the condition of music. And I believe him. As music just has a shortcut to your heart in a way that nothing else does. And Aaron Moorhead said to me, why don't you go back, if you can bear it, and watch some of your work in the last 15 years and just take it in and see what it means to you. And then carry it with you when you step out onto the stage. And it was such a generous and open-hearted encouragement. And I did it. And I went back and I looked at some of the scenes from my journey in Overcross with the character, and the act of remembering these chapters from my life. Because, of course, these films, maybe for an audience, take 2 hours to watch. But for me, they've been a year of my life. Each project has taken a year of my life, and I have very special, very treasured memories of all those actors and all those characters and all those experiences in different states and different countries that we've worked in. And I was looking at, Chris Hemsworth and Anthony Hopkins and Rene Russo, remembering the time we had with Kenneth Branagh and then with all the original 6 Avengers in 2011, Hemsworth and Chris Evans and Scarlett and Robert and Mark and Jeremy Renner, Dark World, Ragnarok, the fun time I had out there with Jeff Goldblum and Tessa Thompson, and then Infinity War, and then season 1 of Loki, and thinking about the friendships I'd made with Owen and Sophia, and then I went for my little jog and I put some music in my headphones, and I thought, just what Loki is doing is he's doing this for his friends. And so, Tom, why don't you do it for your friends? And that's where the two of us met in that moment. And then I was so grateful I had this most amazing crew with me who met me in the moment, and we did it together. And it felt, I was really honored. I was honored to play that scene.
I can't help but notice the parallels between that season 1 scene of Loki watching his own life play out in front of him, and you sort of using the idea of, I'm going to watch this journey condensed into something.
Oh yeah, of course. I hadn't clocked that. Yeah. Except this one ends in catharsis and redemption.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was waiting for you to mention it because I kind of, it's just interesting to use the idea of watching the journey, but now it's like you said, it's the ending is different because it is a catharsis. It is not an existential crisis. It is not, what have I done? It is, look at all I've done. I'm going to do this to honor that.
It's also bittersweet, I think. It's also, I hope it has it feels redemptive because his broken soul is partially healed. And you see this character who is capable of love and has made a decision from and for love. But there's a strain of melancholy in it because in dedicating himself to protecting other people's lives, he's alone. And it reminded me, there's a poetic coda that I was very aware of and we talked about in the development of it. The late, great Don Payne, who is the screenwriter of Thor, wrote a beautiful prologue in that movie where Anthony Hopkins, playing Odin, addresses Thor and Loki as children and says, only one of you can ascend to the throne, but you were both born to be kings. And at the end of season 2, Loki is sitting on a kind of throne, but it's not the throne. It's not arrived in the shape he expected. And there's no glory in it. There's a kind of burden, and he's alone. He's doing it for his friends, but he has to stay there without them. And I found there's a poetic melancholy there, which I found very moving.
I'm curious, and again, I don't want to put like an exact date or time on any ending or anything like that. But we have been discussing this journey and the way this has affected you over however many years. And I'm sure that having Loki as a constant has also, affected you as an actor in other roles. There's always a character to bounce back to and revisit. Have you thought about what it will be like when you're not going back to play Loki? I don't know when that will be. I don't know what that will look like. But as an actor, have you thought about what it's going to be like once you actually have said goodbye to Loki and it sticks?
Playing Loki has completely changed my life and changed the course of my life. It's actually, at this point, very difficult to imagine. It's just been such a transformative journey and full of so many surprises. It's impossible I can't even conceive of my life, at least up to this point, without that. And so it's important to say that and just feel so grateful for it. I feel so grateful for the opportunity to play this ancient, complex, somehow human character from myth and bring him into modern culture and reinterpret him and reinvigorate him every time. And I hope that across the 15 years that I've been playing him, I have tried to be brave and play in lots of other territory, because I was like, I know this day is coming, So I've tried to sort of, I've tried to stretch myself and extend myself into different creative places, play different characters, characters from the past, characters from the present, work with different directors across different genres and get as much breadth and range and experience as I can. So I hope it won't feel different, actually. It'll just feel like the part of the job that I love, which is being curious about and experiencing and expressing the range of the experience of being alive. That's what playing Loki has felt like. And that's what playing great characters in great stories feels like.
Because of the just nature of Marvel and the sort of, it will probably always be around in some way or form. And it will always, like any comic book storytelling, it will mess with timelines and anything like that. As someone who has developed this character over, again, I keep returning to it, but you kind of have been synonymous with this character and will be, and it'll be sort of the Hamlet type thing where it's you originated it, but maybe there will be somebody else's Loki. You've already played with it in the show Loki. There's a different Loki.
Several different Lokis.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm just curious what it feels like and will feel like to sort of, see this character that obviously, it's a comic book character and it's from myth. So you didn't make it up, but you did in many ways originate it, like in theater. To see a future where you are going to see, someone else's Loki, the same way we have someone else's Hamlet, someone else's character, something like that.
I love that. I genuinely love that. It's like that line from George Bernard Shaw. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch, which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as I can before passing it on to future generations. It's sort of, Loki is a sort of splendid torch, which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as I can before passing it on to future generations. What a gift. What a gift to hold the torch for this period of time. Loki has been interpreted by the ancient scribes of the Poetic Edda, by Wagner in the Ring Cycle, by Stan Lee, by Jack Kirby, by Walt Simonson, by Alan Cumming, by Jim Carrey, by me. And there'll be by Richard E. Grant, Sophia DiMartino, Diobia Operai, some alligator they found somewhere. Yeah, it's rich territory, and I'm just grateful that I've had a chance to have a go.
Amazing. So again, we've covered a wide range here, but to sort of try and wrap this up in some kind of bow. We mentioned, you talked briefly about, the day before your audition, life was about to change drastically, and I'm sure life has changed in many ways. You've changed as an actor. It's all, you're going to change over the course of 15 years. I'm curious, when you think about yourself as an actor now, what has been the constant? What has not changed for you since, 24 hours before Thor up until now? What has been the constant for you that has not changed?
Honestly, the constant is my curiosity and joy in the work itself, which is the thrill and the pleasure that I take from working in a company of actors and refining and exploring a scene, a relationship, a story, and working together to find out how can we express this shape of all of our lives in the most eloquent and exciting and honest and truthful and authentic way. That's the bit I love, is being on a set and breaking down a scene and then playing it like a piece of music and hoping that reflects something honest about life that we can all connect to. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
It really is the bit I love. I'm trying to remember that line from E.M. Forster, from Howard's End. It goes something like this. And I'm going to paraphrase it because I haven't got time to look it up. It's only connect the prose and the passion, and love will be at its height. The feedback loop for actors is we get to inhabit a fiction, but hopefully that fiction bears the shape of truths that we recognize about life, and that what we do reflects the ups and downs and peaks and troughs and the breadth and profundity of all of our lives. And that for me is the joy. That really is what I love most about it. And that goes across everything. If you're in a scene, so I'm sorry to be verbose and go too long. If I'm playing a scene and I have to excavate the experience of suffering and pain, there's a real privilege to that, because you think, well, people's lives are full of struggle and pain, and they'll connect to this if I can make it accurate. But also, if a character is excited and full of joy and full of energy and generosity and humor, and getting to represent that side of life as well, getting to be playful or virtuous or kind or quiet or thoughtful or private, all these things. It's like the line that Mobius has in that long scene in the first episode of season 1. I can play the light keys and I can play the heavy keys. As an actor, you just want to play all the keys on the piano, by which I mean to play all the notes on the human condition. That's all we can hope for. I'm sure sometimes we get it wrong, but there's value in the attempt.
I think that's a beautiful answer and a beautiful place to close. Tom, thank you so much for being here, for discussing. I could talk about this role and all your roles for much longer, but thank you for giving us this time. It was truly, truly, truly a pleasure.
You've been so thoughtful, and you have paid such careful attention to the work, and that is the greatest gift to me. I'm so grateful to you,
That means a lot. That means a lot. And this truly was a pleasure and honor. And hopefully we'll talk again down the road.
We will.
Amazing. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, as always, to our brilliant producer, Jamie Muffett, and to the whole team at Backstage. Samantha Sherlock, Mark Stinson, Caitlin Watkins, and of course, Kasey Howe. Visit Backstage.com, and don't forget, you can subscribe to Backstage with code ENVELOPE at checkout for a free trial. 100% free, you simply cannot beat that. For more exclusive content, find us on Facebook and Twitter at In The Envelope, and subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Who should we interview next? Let us know. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another peek in the envelope.